Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. My name is Kate, and I'm a product engineer and a pilot. And today, José is with me.
Hi, Kate. Hi, everyone. I'm José. I'm one of the product engineers working at ePilot. I'm working in the Taudo team. We're focused mainly on pricing, products, and coupon topics. Kate, which team do you work on?
I work in the Rubik, and we're also focused on end customer products and journeys and all of the blocks connected to that. So, yeah, and today we're going to be talking about performance and why it matters, right? Like, what can we do to improve it?
Welcome to the podcast for product engineers.
So performance is one of my favorite topics of all time. As
Yeah,
you know.
same.
And so I think we have a lot to say about this, and it's great that we got this topic.
Yeah. That's nice. So let's start with why it matters, why performance matters. What can you say about that?
There are several ways to go about this, right? First, performance is important for user experience. So, of course, you always want to provide the user the best experience that they can have. Initially, it's about first impressions. So if you have a website and you want your customers to stay on the website and to convert, to buy something, to interact with your web page, first, if you give them a bad experience when the page is loading, then you're already starting off on the wrong foot, right? So the initial page load speed is a tremendously important factor on performance. It's something that we're going to be diving into just shortly. And it's essentially one of the cornerstones of web performance. It's initial page load speed, but then also about perceived quality, right? So a user will perceive the quality of your product or website or application differently if you give them faster loading speeds. What do you think about this?
No, I completely agree with you here, because even me, when I go into some websites which are super slow, I feel super annoyed and I don't want to get back to that website anymore. And it's also about, even if the site is feature rich, it's still I don't care if it's super slow, I cannot use it. So that's super tough.
So an analogy could be you could be driving a very old, broken down car, which gets you to the place, but it's not a good experience, right? You don't want to drive this car. You would rather drive any other car.
Yeah.
And this is why performance is important. Users would rather drive a faster car that still takes them to the destination, but it makes the whole experience more enjoyable and easier to get through.
Yeah, exactly. And also, of course, it affects business, right?
Yeah.
So we have this conversion and revenue, and there are lots of studies that show that there is a direct correlation between the performance of the websites and conversion rates, right? So that's very important.
I think here, so we read through 3 studies actually that talk about this topic. The first one was by Google from 2016, if I'm not wrong, where they saw that any increase in page load speed would essentially take a hit or give you a hit in terms of abandonment of the web page. So if your website took 3 seconds or longer to load on mobile, that 53% of users would bounce. They would essentially close the website and they would go somewhere else.
Yeah. I think I would be one of them, actually.
Yeah, no, the same with me. So if I'm trying to open a web page, especially if I'm coming from Google, if I'm searching for something and I open an article and it takes a very long time to load, sometimes I think that the cost of just jumping out and jumping to the next article is lower than to stay here and invest and wait for this to load.
Exactly.
So in terms of bounces, I think it's a very important concern to have in mind.
Yeah, I have one more research here. So in 2006, Amazon found that every increment of 100 milliseconds in latency costs them a measurable percentage of sales. I think you also mentioned that last time when we were talking with you about that, right?
I think this was a very interesting experiment because they did it on purpose. They started adding 100 millisecond increments to their page load time, and they saw that it would essentially cut the revenue by, if I'm not wrong, like 1% for every 100 milliseconds that they added.
Yeah.
And so this just goes to show that the page load speed is a tremendous factor when it comes to conversion.
Yeah.
If you're a business that is as big as Amazon, every 100 milliseconds is going to count on your bottom line.
No, for sure. Yeah. And of course, all search engines like Google, for example, they prioritize websites with good performance metrics, right? Because in this case, they're better for end customers. So it also makes sense to improve the performance of every web application we're working with.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, like, we can mention the point about scalability, right?
Yeah.
That it's much easier to scale the product which already has a good performance. It's much easier to work with it later, and there is much less of a technical debt, for example. So it's easier to scale it.
For me, this is why performance is one of my favorite topics,
Yeah.
because it's directly tied to quality.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You cannot have high quality product if it's not performant. And quality touches on everything. It goes from the quality to the end user of the application or website, but also code quality, which directly affects your development speed and the amount of bugs that you have in your app.
Exactly, yeah.
And this is why everything is tied. So if you're keeping quality and performance in mind in everything you do in your development, then you're going to have better results overall.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with you here. Every time when I needed to change something, in like one of the legacy products I was working before, it was such a pain because I needed also to think about performance. And every time when you add something, you have like extra overhead, and it's very tough.
But this is why I think having a mindset of quality and performance should be one of the job requirements for any good software development position, right?
Yeah.
So you cannot just do performance and quality after the fact. It needs to be something that is built into the development process. And everything new that you add to the platform, anything that you're refactoring, any new feature that is being implemented, always needs to be done with this mindset. I think
for sure.
You can really not avoid it.
Yeah. And also one small thing that I want to add is like environmental impact, right? Like it's called green coding. So faster apps consume less power, and it reduces the carbon footprint. So and in the end of the day, Pilot works with green energy, and we try to also encourage our customers to go into green energy. And I think it's also nice for us to think about performance in these terms, you know.
And I think this point about green coding is interesting because it affects both front-end and back-end, right?
Yeah.
So on the back-end side, you want to essentially minimize the amount of compute time and power that is required on the server because this minimizes energy usage. And then on the client side, essentially the same, but with the perspective that you're doing this on the user's device. So you're sparing user their battery and any energy that they might consume.
Yeah. No, I think it's very important also to mention that. So now we know why. I think it's clear, right? That performance is very important. Now we have to figure out how to measure that, right? So I recently found a very nice performance pyramid. So basically it touches 4 main points. So it's foundation, hardware and infrastructure. The second one is backend efficiency. Of course, we have to touch front-end optimization and user perception. And we will touch every point on the way. And also we're going to discuss some tools. For example, I use Lighthouse most of the times, and I use also browser profiler. Is there anything you also use?
I'm a very big fan of Google's Page Speed Insights. Essentially, they give you the same metrics that Lighthouse gives you. They probably run exactly the same code against your website, but they do it on their side, on their servers, and they also give you information from the Chrome UX reports, which is a data set that they collect anonymously from users' browsers, and which allows you to analyze the actual performance in production of your website. And this gives you a lot of interesting data that you wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, if you're a larger company and you have set up monitoring tools such as Datadog or other alternative services, then you can probably get insights from actual production usage of your application. But this comes to you directly from Google and directly from the user's browsers. And so there is no overhead here. There is nothing new that you need to implement. You can just put your website into PageSpeed Insights and you get your data from Chrome UX Report.
Cool. It sounds like a very good tool, but I think it works only for old websites, right? Like not for new ones.
Exactly. So if you haven't, like if your website isn't yet being used by users in production, they won't have the data on this. But if you've released your website to the world and users have been using it for 1 month, you're already going to have data on that. I mean, as long as you have, I don't know what the number is, but probably hundreds of users is already going to give you significant information.
Yeah, that's cool. So we can use it for our end customer-facing tools, right? Like, I mean, products in the pilot.
I've used it at the pilot, actually.
Oh,
and
really?
Actually, it allows you to, so if you were to, you can even look at one specific page. It's not just the entire domain. So I could even see that entities are taking this amount of time to load. And I can see that there's room for improvement in this particular entity type, for example. Also, it allows you to compare data historically. So we can see
that's
that
nice, really.
the amount of work that we're putting into performance directly correlates with user experience in the end.
Nice.
This is a great way to persuade all stakeholders that we should put time into performance and we should invest in quality.
Let's do that, definitely. We can make a small demo about that.
Yeah. Also, in terms of tooling, I've relied in the past on React DevTools. It's a big favorite of mine. And if you're using React in your applications, with React DevTools, you can just use it to spot re-renderings or unnecessary re-renders of your application or of any components. And essentially, this allows you to debug performance issues that might be going on.
Yeah, I see. That's very cool. So since we're both more concentrated on front end, let's maybe start with front end bottlenecks that we can see. And last time when we talked with you about that, you mentioned that there is a big distinction, right, between page loading speed and user interaction React speed.
Yes. So for me, in my mind, I make this split. In terms of performance on the client specifically, we have the initial page load performance topics, and we have everything that comes after that, right? So when we're talking about initial page load, I'm thinking about how much time does it take from the user typing in the URL into the URL bar, hitting enter, and then seeing everything that they want to see and actually being able to interact with the web page. So there are a bunch of things that are happening in between these two steps, as you know. And there are a bunch of optimizations that we can apply here between these two steps. And then there are a different subset of optimizations that you can apply for everything that comes after actual page load. So when the user is already on your website and they are scrolling through an entities table and they are clicking on an entity and they're trying to view more details about an entity, the amount of time that it takes for them to, or between the point that they input some information into the web page and that they get the results that they're looking for, I think this involves a different subset of optimizations that we can also cover. So maybe let's look at the first.
Yeah, let's do that. And like from my personal opinion, one of the most important is large bundle size. Bundle sizes, because there are lots of applications which use, for example, the whole, like they're not optimized to use like tree shaking features, for example, or they include some unnecessary dependencies. And this is something we can also discuss. Like, what do you do, for example, to improve this, like in terms of large bundle sizes? Do you have some specific ideas that you use?
So yes. So first, we want to work with modern tooling, right?
For sure, yeah.
Modern tooling that allows you to use ES modules and that has features that allow you to tree shake your bundles are going to be very important in bundle size in the end. At ePilot, in ePilot 360, which is our core product, I would say, or one of our core products, I don't want to detract from any of the other products. There we're using MFEs, so micro frontends, and we're using a single SPA framework to essentially orchestrate all of these MFEs. But every single MFE comes with its own bundle.
Yeah.
I mean, they all share the same instance of React. So we're importing React only once, for example. But then they each come with their own bundle, and they each come with their own dependencies. And if we didn't have tree shaking capabilities, for example, each of these bundles could reach megabytes inside.
Yeah.
And so we want to ensure that we keep these bundles as small as possible to decrease the amount of time that it takes for each page to load. Also because if you load one single page, you might be loading 5 different MFEs there. And so you load the page initially, then you trigger loading each MFE individually. If this adds up to 50 megabytes, it's going to take a few seconds for the page to load.
Yeah.
And of course, you don't want to input this burden.
Yeah, for sure. But also there are some libraries which are heavy by themselves, right?
Exactly.
Like, for example, like Ladash is very heavy, right? And it's better to use like some alternative, or for example, Ladash ES, which is like much smaller, or some libraries, for example, like Moment.js, they can be replaced with Date.fns, which we do also. And I think it's a very nice approach also to find some smaller applications, some smaller libraries that you can use, right?
I've always wondered how, we say date FNS. I've always wondered whether we would say date functions or date FNS. The date FNS is funny. No, I like it. It's one of these things like you read it and you don't say it out loud, and then you hear it out loud, and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it's date FNS. Yeah,
maybe.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. But it's like sense. SQL, you know. It's
exactly.
the same. It's
SQL, SQL.
Yeah. It's like
GIF,
the same.
GIF.
Yeah. And also I think what is important to mention is, for example, unoptimized images. They also very affect, right? And they affect not only the bundle size, but they affect also the slowest of the page itself. And for example, if we use like some heavy image formats like PNG or JPEG without compression, it definitely affects performance, definitely affects the user experience. So what we can do is use modern formats, right? Like WebP or AVIF, for example, and we can also implement some responsive image techniques for that. So we've been doing that recently also for journeys. So it works.
I think this is like an often disregarded topic, and it's very easy to forget about it, right?
Exactly.
It's very easy to just throw in like a 5 megabyte image and then just forget about it. And if you're using a platform that doesn't optimize for this, then your user ends up having to wait 5 seconds just for an image to be loaded, when they could have waited 100 milliseconds instead if the image had been properly compressed and minimized. And in journeys, we're doing this, right? So
we do that,
Eddy Pilot, if you were to throw an image into a journey and it's a huge image, we would provide your end customer with the smallest
compression,
image that they could still see with maintaining quality.
Yeah. But it's the same with fonts, right? That we have to use like nice subset fonts, for example, from Google Fonts API, which are good and lightweight. So what we'd also do. Another thing which also affects performance is blocking JavaScript executions, right? So it also could be affected by large unminified JavaScript files. And usually I also face it a lot in the past, my previous companies, when I saw uncompressed JavaScript files. When you open it, it's like it has everything, all of the class names, all of the styles, and you're like, oh, wow, what are we doing here? So we definitely should compress all of the files that we export for our bundle sizes to be smaller, right?
Absolutely. And I think this is why it's important to stay up to date with your tooling, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You don't want to be using a Webpack version from 5 years ago, and there are so many optimizations that have been introduced in recent years into these bundlers. That if you're not leveraging them, you're just leaving gains on the table.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also nice to use all the modern tools in terms of, for example, source map, right? To see how much different bundles weight and what can be improved, right? And for example, for me also, for journeys, it was a very nice tool. We started to use Vite, and we started to use also source map there. And it shows so much, like you can basically click through every point and be like, this is a very heavy library. Maybe we can replace it to find all of those bottlenecks and thresholds. It's fantastic.
Plus, it's funny how modern tooling not only impacts the end user experience, but also developer experience, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because things just run so much faster on your machine. And
of
just
course.
having vtest run your tests rather than having something like Jest
Yeah.
in 1 second versus like 1 minute just makes a huge difference in terms of development speed.
Yeah,
you can
for
just
sure.
implement things so much faster and be more confident in what you're doing because just tests are green and running fast. And,
yeah, for sure. And also using, for example, source map, we can also go through third-party scripts, right? We can figure out what are those poorly written third-party libraries. They don't handle, for example, async loading properly, or they don't support reshaking. So it's also, I think it's also very important to know what exactly you use and why, right? Like, why do you use this specific library? What can be improved here?
Shall we get into the user interaction side of performance on the client?
Let's do that.
First, especially if you're building apps with React, right? I think it's very easy to have very unoptimized apps and apps which are first rendering too often and apps that are fetching data that they might not need or fetching data in an inefficient manner. And so maybe I'll just throw this to you, like what do you think we can do to improve on this? And what type of tooling should we be using to guarantee that we don't have inefficiencies happening on the client side?
Oh, wait, for me, the main thing is one of the main things is when we have inefficient CSS and inefficient DOM management. This is actually my favorite topic. When I started to work as a front-end developer, for me, it was like the main thing I can simply and very fastly improve in my application. And basically, for example, when we have very deeply nested DOM structures, it's called, actually, there is a specific term for that. It's called divvities. So we have like extra divs which are not needed. And especially when we use some UI libraries, that, for example, Box from Material UI, it has several divs inside, which we don't need. And we should be very cautious about that because we need to render all of those applications, like all of those parts. And we should remove definitely some extra divs from there because it affects. And also, for example, when we use inline styles, because if we talk about React, React re-renders all of those inline styles component because React considers them as to be a new object every time. So all of those elements that have inline stylings should be rendered every time. So if you, for example, turn on this in React Div Tools, if you set the checkbox to show me what is re-rendered, you will see like a Christmas tree of highlights. There all the time when you have lots of inline styles. We recently removed lots of inline styles and it improved performance actually drastically. So I think it's very important also to mention.
I think we could spend 1 hour talking about how to optimize React apps.
For sure.
Just thinking about memoization and efficient component architecture and how to structure your components. I think can have a huge and very significant impact on how your app behaves and
for sure.
How performance is perceived on your app.
Yeah, for sure. And optimize CSS selectors, instead of using div, parent of unenumerated list, a parent of list, we can just give them class names and that's it. It will be also much faster. Do you have anything to add here?
On the front end side, maybe let's talk about how front end and client connects to backend, right? So oftentimes it's very easy to just say, okay, let's just add or let's just load this additional piece of data from the front end and not think of the cumulative impact that this has on your application. So it's very easy to just say, let's just fetch this additional request and not think that maybe there is a way to optimize the requests that you're making from your client-side application to your API to minimize first the amount of requests that are being done and then to optimize the concurrency of these requests. So in both on client-side and in backend, we want to avoid as much as we can having requests or let's say asynchronous operations running sequentially when they can be running concurrently, right? So if you can trigger multiple loading states at the same time, and if you can essentially minimize the amount of sequential operations that have to happen for either a page to be loaded or a user interaction to be responded to, then the best performance perception you're going to have here.
Yeah, I totally agree with you here. And there are also some other bottlenecks, right? Like in backend, for example, if we have like an optimized API design, like in general, so it really affects. Or if we have resource-intensive backend tasks, also it also affects. So we have to also take into consideration that performance as in that performance pyramid is connected not only to frontend, right, but also to backend, and also, for example, to network bottlenecks, right? So we have like high latency or large payloads or excessive API calls, which also affect. We're not going to not going to dive deeper into these topics right now because it will take us extra 3 hours to discuss these topics, but I think it's important to mention. And also that there are infrastructure bottlenecks, right?
Yeah.
In the pilot we use AWS, so we allow AWS to take care of that, but I think there are lots of websites still, of course, lots of platforms that do not use cloud computing, so they definitely should take care of that.
I think, like for me, one of the great advantages of serverless, of course.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
Probably Alex and Viliami might have covered this. It's the concurrency that you can have when making any requests through the backend, right? So essentially, you can have infinite concurrency if you set up serverless correctly, which would allow you to scale from 1 user to 1 million users in a second.
Yeah.
And if I don't know if you have like on-premises servers or if you have a more old school stack, infrastructure stack, then you might be suffering some issues that you wouldn't have to suffer through if you were using serverless architecture.
Yeah, I totally agree with you here. And also, I think it's very important to mention, like I also faced it like multiple times in my previous companies, that there are no performance monitoring, for example, in these companies. And basically, you don't know what is happening. And the only thing to know is that you go to Lighthouse or you go to the Google tool that you mentioned, right, or the Profiler browser, and you check it there. But every good company, I think, should have performance monitoring because it's very important, as we already mentioned. And the basically lack of visibility, it goes also due to missing monitoring tools. It goes into lots of bottlenecks, right? I think we also use Datadog to.
Yes, and actually, I love being able to just see alerts on Slack saying like, oh, this request is taking more than 30 seconds. Go see why, like go find out why. Sometimes maybe it's something that was done wrong in the development process of, I don't know, one particular API endpoint, or maybe it's something that you're depending on that is acting slower than it should. So say you are relying on a third-party API to give you some information, some data, and this third-party API is not responding as expected. It's either slower or it's not responding at all. Then having this monitoring allows you to find these issues, spot these issues sooner than you would have otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with you here. I think it's very important to also monitor and to know what is happening, basically. Yeah, because in this case, you know why it's happening.
It's like if there's no transparency, if you can see it, then you cannot optimize it. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Information is a key, right?
Exactly.
So now I would like us to touch UX, basically, like how to improve UX. Because even if you think through all of those topics we just touched, we still might have some like third-party thing, or when we have to still make our customers happy by just improving the UX when we load data or we request something. So there are lots of psychological tricks, actually. I think you also know like lots of them, but for example, like adding micro interactions, like some button animations to make the app feel more responsive even when it isn't, or like some progress indicators or like estimated time displays. For example, like case study, Amazon's your order is being processed message smooth over actual backend delays. So I think it's very cool.
So I think it's interesting. Like if you were to optimize performance infinitely, you would still always have to wait for data to load, right?
For sure,
and for compute to happen, for I/O to happen. And so there are always going to be empty states or state where the user is waiting for something to happen. Now, if you can essentially entertain the user, or if you can show them that something is happening, even though you're just essentially changing something graphically on screen, then you can improve their experience. You give them confidence that data is being loaded, or essentially, I don't know, you can hypnotize a user with a loading spinner.
With a frog.
While if they were to have just a blank screen, they might think, oh, nothing is happening.
Yeah. It's
But
broken.
it's
I have to
broken.
reload it, yeah.
But just showing the loading indicator, showing that data is being loaded and something is happening, just gives the user the expectation that eventually they're going to get the information that they need. And doesn't give them the perception that, oh, maybe something broke.
Yeah, for sure. We recently added some very funny facts to one of our loaders just for customers to be entertained while they're waiting for data.
Funny facts? Is this on
funny
Journeys?
facts. Yeah, it's on Journeys for PV Rooftop Navigator.
Oh.
We share some very funny facts about green energy for customers to be like, oh yeah, I'm using PV panels now.
This reminds me, like in my elevator, in my building, it gives you animal facts as you're going up the floors, right?
Oh, really?
So I think this is almost like a good analogy. Like
Yeah,
the elevator
exactly.
is always going to take time to get up to the 10th floor. And so you might as well just give the user something to look at or to be distracted with while this process is happening.
Yeah. So basically you make them being present, So you're doing a great job here.
And it's not about fooling the user, or
No,
it's not about like creating an illusion. It's about giving them something to look at and showing that you are doing something. And
that something is happening. Basically,
you're not in a broken state.
I think it's very important. And also, of course, we can say about, for example, skeleton screens, right? I think it's also like I faced them so many times before, and every time when I see the skeleton screens instead of widescreen, it feels much better. How does it feel for you?
I think it actually gives me pleasure to open Spotify, for example, and see my playlists being loaded in individually, and while they're still being loaded, the screen is just sliding with this smooth gradient.
Nice.
It's peaceful. And if they didn't have that, it would just be blank screen and then things pop in immediately. But just adding these micro interactions and these smooth animations just gives me a sense of comfort that I wouldn't have otherwise, right? It shows me you are loading data. Even if they weren't, they can give me that perception by just what they show me.
No, I totally agree. And also there is one trick that also it depends on the website. You can use it or you cannot. It depends on the usage. But for example, preemptive loading, right? For example, when users just hover over the next button and the data is being downloaded at this specific moment when you hover over it. So customers, they still don't know what is happening, but you already do something behind the ground.
We do this on Entity Stable, actually.
Really?
So if you're on Entity Stable and you're on the first page, if you hover over page 2, we're already loading the data that is going to be displayed on page 2. Because we know that it's highly likely that the user is going to navigate to the next page, and so we might as well load the data already. And then when you click the button, it's there immediately.
Yeah, nice.
We don't even show the loading state.
Because you don't need that, right?
Exactly.
So
I think this preemptive loading or knowing what is more likely to happen in the future, that the user is probably going to want to navigate to the next page, allows you to make these decisions that then in the end do impact the customer experience.
Yeah, for sure. And also, of course, we have to think about progressive rendering in general, so that we should show something on the fly all the time, right? That for customers, instead of having just a black or just a white screen, something that is rendered very, very fast and we can show it. So it's also nice.
Also, I also find that this makes for a good developer experience because, for example, let's think about a large React app where you have a lot of components that have different data dependencies and needs. And so if you have one component that just loads the customer data and you have another component that just loads and displays consumption data. These are probably making two separate API requests, right? And being able to have them load independently and not having to wait for all of the data to have been loaded to display anything, I think gives also a good user experience.
For sure, yeah.
So here you are performing multiple requests concurrently, not sequentially, and you are showing data as you get it, and you're not waiting for the entire page or all of the content that you need to render to be loaded to be actually able to display something. I think this also it gives a good user experience in the end. And then in terms of developer experience, it allows you to essentially segregate the logic that you're writing and to segregate the data loading logic into each individual component. And so the consumption component does not need to be aware of the user information component because they can just work individually, load data individually, and show data individually without having to synchronize it.
Yeah, for sure. But also I think it's very important to mention that the whole team that you work with, or I work with, or anyone work with, should be aligned on that, right? Like we all, as a company, as a team, as a group of developers, we should always think about performance. We should have it as like one of our main core values every time, like aligned, of course, with code practices, with good code practices, with what we do and why we do that. But I think performance is always out of the question why, because it's important, right?
I fully agree. I think as an engineering team, it's important to, again, have quality mindset as one of your values. And a very big and important subset of quality topics is performance. And probably one of the highest or most important ones in my mind. And so having the entire team aligned on these goals, I think is essential for you to develop a high quality product.
So to summarize everything, I really want to say that it's very important when the whole team is aligned on performance topics, right? Like when we, as a team and as a company, we think about performance and take it into consideration.
Also, I think it's important to mention that performance it's not a zero-sum game. It's not a win or lose game, right? It's about incremental gains. So you can make incremental improvements to performance on your application by just looking at small subsets of your application and thinking about small problems individually and not having to consider everything as a whole. So, for example, I can just work on minimizing the amount of requests that is made for a certain component. And this is already going to have performance benefits on the application. I don't need to think about minimizing all requests at once. I can do things slowly and I can go through my entire stack one piece at a time. And making small gains on each part of the application can end up giving you big performance benefits. And so performance can be thought of incrementally and not just as a monolithic topic. I think it's important to mention this.
I think it's very important to mention, and we all should be aligned on that, right?
Exactly. And so any work that you put into performance pays off in the end. It's not either you win or you lose. All work that is put into performance has a benefit.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, thank you so much, José. It's always nice talking to you, you know?
It's so nice talking to you. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. Have a nice day.
You've been listening to the podcast for product engineers. Don't forget to subscribe and join us next time.